Okay, so now we're in this section, we're going to take a look at traversing a one-dimensional array. Occasionally, we need to traverse or visit each index in an array to carry out some action. And we can do this using a loop that counts from the first index of the array to the last index. For example, if we traverse an array called R of size 5 to print the content of each index in the array, we could use a for loop. We could use any loop, but in this example I've used a for loop. Int I equals 0, so the counter starts at 0, which also maps well to the fact that the first index in an array is always 0. We continue so long as I is less than 5, and we increase I by 1 to progress from 0 to 5. And then within the loop we simply print jOptionPane.showMessageDialog null, comma, Ri. And what Ri does is it accesses index I in the array R. If we had just put I in the brackets there and left out the R part, it would just print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So watch out for that. We have to reference the array itself. Sometimes, however, we may not know the size of the array. In this case, we can use the length field. Now I call it a field here instead of a method because while it behaves for all intents and purposes as in the same way that the length method that we use with the string class behaves, it's not technically a method. Okay, but it does work in much the same way. So what we do here is we declare a variable len, which is an int, and then we say len is equal to r.length. Okay, and you'll notice there's no round brackets after length. That's the difference between this and the length method that we use with the string class, so watch out for that. No brackets when we're working with arrays. What this does is then, it counts the number of elements in the array and it stores it in len. This could then be applied to our example as follows. For int I equals 0, I less than, and instead of 5 here, we've got r.length. So it will count how many elements are in the array, and then we can do our increment, which is I++, and the action within the loop then is the same. So this is something that can be quite useful when we're doing different applications and we need to visit each space in an array where we may or may not know the length of that particular array. So again, just a reminder, there are no brackets after the word length. This is because length is a field, not a method, so watch out for that. We do use the brackets when we're getting the length of a string. We don't have brackets when we're getting the length of an array, so be mindful of that in your examples. Let's take a look at a coded example. Modify the results1 app application to print all of the contents of the array. So in the previous example, we just printed the first index and the last index of the array, but here we want to print all of the contents of the array. So let's switch over to TextPad now. Okay, so here I have simply resaved my results1 app as results2 app, and I've correspondingly then I have changed the class name and I've changed my comment at the top. And all we're asked is that instead of printing just the first and the last index of the array, we put in a loop which will traverse the array and print all elements of the array. So I'm going to just add another for loop here. For int I equals 0. I is less than, again we could put 5, but in this instance let's go with r.length for the practice, which will get the length of the array, and then our increment I++. Inside that then we do want to print, so we have jOptionPane.showMessageDialog. The first result is, now previously we had R0, okay, and we had this message, the first result is. So I'm going to just take out this little string message, and all we want to print is the contents of each section of the array. So I'll change my 0 to I, because I changes every time we go through the loop. And then after that line of code, I'll close my curly bracket for my loop, and I'll just take out this last one then, because we won't need this. So I've got my loop, which loops from 0 to the length of the array, increasing by 1 each time, and printing the contents of the array at that particular index. Control and 1 will compile, Control and 2 will run. Again, we'll enter in 5 results, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it prints 5, 6, 4, 8, 9. So it prints the content of the array exactly as I had input it. So that's a very basic example of how we can traverse an array. Again, in this example, our action was one line of code. Our action can be many lines of code. But the key here is that we're using the counter I as a way of referencing the index of each space in the array. And that's the key to traversing an array using a loop. Next thing we're going to take a look at now is two-dimensional arrays. And we'll see the difference between a one and a two-dimensional array when it comes to declaring, creating, and indeed what we can do with them to store data. So let's take a look at that next.